Welcome to The Power of the P, the podcast designed to help you become empowered in your truth, free of fear. I'm E.L. Brooks, your host, here to bring you expert advice and effective tools based on neuroscience to help you deal with all the stressors in life, relationships, and work. I'm here to keep you off that struggle bus through the power of the P. Are you ready? Then let's go. Welcome to The Power of the P, episode number 16. And thank you for tuning in. And if this is your first time here at The Power of the P, let me set your expectations right now. This show is like a Dear John life advice show, except for I'm EL. So it's Dear EL, where followers and subscribers send in questions of things that they're struggling and dealing with. And I'll pick one of those questions and give you some insight and provide some effective tools that are usually backed in neuroscience, not always, like someone pointed out. And I'll give you one key takeaway at the end to log into your memory to help you become more resilient and emotionally stable. Okay, so now we finally pulled the trigger. We've been receiving tons and tons and tons of requests to do a show around relationships, really around relationship advice. And for a lot of you, we replied back and said to sign up for our online course, The Secret to Acquiring Love. Well, you'll get all of the answers that you need to know and the answers that you didn't even know you needed to know, right? Plus, you'll get a 15-point assessment vetting guide to dating. Now, in that course, we talk about the hidden beliefs that you pick up along the way when you were wounded by love, right? And you'll become aware of the hidden narratives around the wounds that you're continuing to tell yourself that are now driving your dating strategies. The unmet needs that influence you to find familiarity, not love. And so, well, Kathy C. wrote back pretty firmly. Good for you, Kathy. And she said, again, very firmly, I would like your free, capital letters, free perspective on dating. And if I like what you're saying, then I will sign up for your course. And she said, I challenge you to that task, point blank. So I guess this is my audition, Kathy, right? As I always accept the challenge. But the real challenge here is doing an episode that brings value without taking away from those who are paying for the course, right? So the challenge is to come up with another perspective and viewpoints that add value. So again, I guess this is my challenge and audition that I'm accepting. So Kathy, I'm going to dedicate this episode number 16 to you. And ironically, we're calling this episode Real Love Isn't About You. And I say that because the underlying reason for failed relationships is selfishness and the belief that you have better and more options, really around distraction and comparison. And remember, comparison is the thief of all joy. And when I say selfishness, I'm not actually talking directly to you. I'm just telling you in general, one of the main causes of failed relationship is our ability to be selfish. But what are the drivers underneath those beliefs, right? The beliefs of being selfish and having more and better options, right? That's what we're going to uncover today. So let's first level set here and let me blow up a few current beliefs around love. First off, we don't fall in love. We initially fall into familiarity, which means 99% of all relationships will be considered karmic assignment relationships or trauma bonds, right? It's not love. It's what we believe love to be based on the personal exposure to the expression of what love is, which is usually human love. And I'll explain that at the end. Number two is we don't have a type. We have a pattern. Everyone has an attachment style that is based on how they interacted with their caregiver or caregivers. And the one caregiver that in your perception imprinted trauma on you, making you feel less than, not good enough, and not worthy, that is the type that you're now going to be attracted to, because that is the unconscious wound that you need to heal. And that is the person you associate your lack with. And our soul knows that we have no lack. So now our soul is on a mission to get you to see that as well. So what is our lack? These are the unmet needs that influence you to find familiarity, not love. It's the internal programming. It's human love. It's not our default setting, right? Which is pure love. We do as we have been done by. That's why when I see someone in an abusive relationship, almost 9 times out of 10, that person was exposed to it or was a victim of it prior to the current relationship that they're in, which is why it becomes familiar, because they seek it, because it's all that they know. That person that you're attracted to is the exact person that you need to navigate through to get back to self-love. Third, we're not really in a relationship with our partners. We're unconsciously playing out unhealed wounds and unresolved traumas from our past, right? That insecure attachment that we had with one or more of our caregivers, which is why 3 out of the 4 attachment styles are considered insecure, right? It's our triggers and insecurities, right, that are formed within us way before we start dating. And here is an aha moment. If you don't understand this process and this concept, you will continue to repeat these patterns until you change your ways, until you become sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? You can't give what you don't have. And what you don't have is a sense of self, right? A solid connection to yourself that knows that you are worthy, that you are enough, and more importantly, that you're already love. And when you become love again, you'll never be afraid of rejection. What you'll learn in this episode is that you don't have an appreciation for yourself. Therefore, you will not have a full appreciation for others. And this, of course, is generally speaking, right? So let me explain. Until you're able to first recognize your triggers and insecurities, then second, work on and work out your triggers and insecurities, they are guaranteed, and I'll say that, they are guaranteed to continue to be insurmountable, right? I'll say that again. Your insecurities and your triggers are guaranteed to be insurmountable if you're not working on them and you're not recognizing them, right? So they will continue to keep you in fear, in doubt, and it will ironically be all in your delusional mind, right? We focus on certain things and we start to see those things that we focus on. And you will become the creator of chaos, sabotaging your own happiness and crime victim at the same time, right? Because this is far from our default setting. This is far from the pure energy of love, connection, and compassion, right? This is truly fear. You see, we experience the world that we focus on, right? The lens that is colored by our carefully curated construct that we tend to build up in our own minds, right? And I call it the list. Now, women have it more than men do, right? Because men are just very, very simple. Like men just say, hey, when we're in the beginning, when we're tied to our ego, we just say, hey, man, she just needs to be hot. That's it. And our friends are like, yeah, man, she just needs to be hot. And I don't want to be exclusive. I want to be inclusive, right? So if a man is gay, right, the same thing applies. He just has to be hot, right? Whereas women are more detail oriented. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're just different. Men are for Mars, women are for Venus. And a woman with their more detailed lists will say, hey, he needs to be 6'2" at least, right? Dark hair, dreamy eyes. He has to have his own house, no kids, millionaire preferably, no mother-in-law and no sisters, right? And same thing, to be inclusive, if she's into women, same thing applies. Again, you cannot give what you yourself do not have, right? Because we reproduce who we are. And the only way to get better and experience better relationships is for you to get better with yourself and start to experience who you really are at the core. And that requires you to stop looking out at this whole material world, right? As I call it, right? People look out at the material world as a solution to all their problems, right? That's the world that I say attracts and distracts, right? Doesn't do anything for you, right? No, you have to start to look inward. You have to start to self-reflect and start to accept and appreciate you first, right? So in my one-on-one sessions, I tell my clients that they need to become their own hero sheroes in their own love journeys, right? And they need to develop a superpower to fly, which means first love yourself. And when you do this, you're now able to show people how to love you because you'll know probably for the first time how to love yourself, right? But most people have a serious problem that prevents them from looking inward, right? They surrender control because they're outward facing. And when you're outwardly facing, you're more susceptible to comparing, shaming, and blaming because you start to weave in and out of all three. And in relationships, we tend to lean more towards the blaming, right? Blaming ourselves and blaming others. So we end up playing the blame game. And this creates a big illusion. Let me explain. If my mind is always focused on lack, right? What's wrong with me? What you're doing wrong, right? Which is a projection of my own insecurities, right? Which causes me to focus on what I'm not getting from you and what I'm not getting from life. And if I'm constantly comparing, how can I appreciate you? How can I appreciate what I have in you? And if I'm focused on blaming you for everything that you do wrong, and I never appreciate and acknowledge anything that you do right, how is the relationship going to fare, right? There's just a lack of gratitude. And where there's a lack of gratitude, there's a deficit of love, really self-love. So one of the main qualities we all lack as a society is the art of being grateful and appreciative. If we all had just a little bit more gratitude and appreciation, there'd be less anger, there'd be less judgment and less tension in the world. We hunger for appreciation. And I'll say that again. We all hunger for appreciation. It is the thing that lights up our souls. And when we don't experience that, we focus on our problems or the illusion that we've colored to be problematic, right? So when we're not engaged in thinking about our problems, we're usually spending about 95% of that time thinking about ourselves, which again is the selfishness, right? And sadly, and most of our thoughts are negative in nature, right? I'm not this, I'm not that. I can't do this, I can't do that. You can't do this, and you can't do that. You're not this, you're not that. It's self-loathing that turns into judgment. But all judgment is self-judgment, right? We're simply projecting our own insecurities onto other people. So most of us have a huge deficit in giving and receiving daily appreciation. So our souls become flat, and it's usually due to a false sense of pride, the fear of rejection, right? But pride in my world simply means primitive responses in dysregulated emotions. That's because that mental state is an animal and ego. And the key word here is ego, right? Because anytime that your ego, right, when we engage in our ego, we're not being conscious because we're typically living in the past. Now, in a recent episode, I think it was episode number 15, the one before, I talked about the concept of the baby elephant. People fail to recognize that they're not the same person, right? They're not that baby elephant anymore. They've grown, but they're still shackled mentally by the small chain and stake that they can easily break free from, right? If they believe more in themselves and if they were more conscious, right? That's why I believe that consciousness is the key to everything. Now, here's where I'm going to get a little deep. When we're traumatized, in a lot of cases, our amygdala, right? That's our ability to manage our emotions and stuff like that can become damaged, which makes our amygdala more susceptible to amygdala hijacking, right? It's a form of arrested development, which is why you can see a 40-year-old adult throw a temper tantrum that mirrors the behavior of a teenager, right? Chances are that they've reverted back to the moment where they learned that racket behavior as an effective strategy as a teenager who didn't know at the time how to regulate their emotions, right? And as a result of their amygdala getting hijacked, they once again are unable to regulate their emotions as a grown adult. Their amygdala is emotionally frozen, right? They're emotionally frozen in a time trap. Now, just about every case of emotionally frozen individuals, there's a lack of self-love due to past trauma, which impacts a person's self-esteem, right? And now the nervous system's response is to seek and create safety. The unconscious mind, which is everything below the neck, is what we call it. The unconscious mind's goal is now to create safety and comfort. Its goal is simply to survive, which is what a lot of people are doing, right? But to survive means to not thrive. So a lot of people are surviving, which means a lot of people aren't thriving. So how do we learn to stop surviving and start thriving? Well, we need to change our perspective, right? People believe our goal is to be happy. And if we're not happy all the time, there must be something wrong, right? No. Happiness is a byproduct of knowing all of the other emotions and knowing how to navigate through them to solve a problem, right? We're not meant to be in a perpetual state of stagnation. We're not meant to be happy all the time. We're not meant to be sad all the time, right? We need to be on a journey that challenges us to keep us awake. Therefore, I believe that our goal should be more around being conscious, being more present. Therefore, we're not trapped and bound by these past pains, right? That doesn't really exist in our current reality, right? It's just playing out in our imaginations, right? Where we're not also fearful of a future event or events that also don't exist in our current reality, right? They're also playing out in our imagination, right? Like so-and-so is going to leave me, or everyone that I date always cheats on me, right? I call these fear love scripts. Now, everyone has a fear love script, and everyone's fear love script is tied to their personal experience and their past pain, right? Remember, in a lot of episodes, I always mention our past pain informs our future fears, right? So my fear love script was, I'm going to get you before you get me, right? And you see, I experienced being in the entertainment industry, a lot of opportunistic women. I saw that all the time, and it drove fear into my perception, right? So my lens, I started seeing that, right? Right. And so I became afraid of love in a way, right? My trust level was really, really low. Now, how do you think I fared in my relationships with that type of fear love script, right? Obviously, my relationships failed. So one lady that I was dating, she was a psychologist, and she was really, really fascinated with this whole fear love script thing, right? So I helped her unpack her fear love script. And what she determined was that her fear love script was, I help everyone become a better person and they eventually leave me, right? So how do you think that relationship played out, right? I will admit, she did make me a better person. But the more that she poured into me, the more heightened her insecurities became. And then they continued to play out until her fears were fulfilled, right? Despite me even warning her. And I gave her this analogy, right? I told her, it's like, I tried to actually I use this analogy because I was trying to bring her into the present moment, right? So I warned her, I was like, look, it's like I'm this teddy bear, and you've got this teddy bear that you're squeezing so hard because you're so fearful of losing it. But the harder that you squeeze, like I can't breathe. And I'm afraid that the harder that you squeeze and the longer that you squeeze, you're going to squeeze my head off. My head's going to pop, right? So despite that warning, she became a self-fulfilling prophet, right? Because we ended up breaking up because overall her insecurities were insurmountable. So the inevitable happened, right? You want to see out your fears, which is what we don't realize. We perpetuate the very thing that we're fearing and that we're trying to avoid. We perpetuate it and we create it, right? That was the whole thing when going back, that we create our own chaos and we play victim in it, right? If we don't work on our insecurities and work out our insecurities, they will always continue to be insurmountable. Her fear energy, right, to simplify everything, her fear energy was more powerful than her ability to love, not just me, but herself, right? And we have to realize that the two things that cause the most damage to the quality of our lives is the misuse of our memory that holds us back in the past, right? Like that baby elephant, right? To be very present, right? And then the lack of control over our imagination, right? Sadhguru says that we suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality, right? So we need our imagination to thrive, right? It's the imagination around the belief that we can achieve anything because we're worthy and we're enough. And more importantly, we are loved, right? It's not the belief that we're not worthy and that things are impossible or things will not work out in our favor, right? That's all fear. That's not imagination. So in order to control our fears, really our fear of rejection, we seek out these expert opinions, right? In the form of trying to gain control, which is one of the reasons why I was reluctant to do this episode, right? But Kathy called me out, and I'm always up for a challenge. But I'm telling you the things that you need to hear, which may not be the things that you want to hear. There are tons of life coaches and experts, so-called experts, I say, giving advice on how to win her or him, right? How to be the man or woman he or she wants you to be. In a lot of cases, they're teaching you to chase and or avoid, right? In essence, they're teaching you how to play games, right? Don't be the first to call. Wait 2 days to respond. Take control of the conversation. Be aggressive, chase, etc. This is a false sense of control, right? Make no mistake about it. This is a game, and love is not a game, and your significant other is not a trophy or prize that you're meant to win. This is why most relationships fail. Their approach is completely wrong, right? Most people are going into the relationship and they're not being their authentic self for fear of rejection. But here is not such an obvious aha moment, right? And really, really think about this. If you're not being your authentic self, you're already rejected, right? Because you're rejecting your truth. You're rejecting yourself. It's self-rejection. And I'll say it again. If you go into a relationship walking on eggshells, right, not being yourself for fear of rejection, you're already rejecting yourself. And eventually your truth will want to shine either through shadow behavior, right, things that you're doing behind the person's back, right, or through your egoic mind that basically says, here I am, take it or leave it. This is who I am. Get over it, deal with it, right? So you will start to unravel eventually, and so will the relationship. I've done couples counseling for a while now, right? And one of the biggest problems I end up solving after I can get each individual to really look through the surface issues that they think they're having, right? That's always being driven by more core rooted problems, right? Is having each individual start to love and accept themselves and stop projecting their own judgment of self onto their partners. I get them to identify where the initial narrative came from, right? That made them feel less than, not good enough, and or not lovable, right? That's the nugget that I get each individual to identify and to uncover, right? Then their partner can have a clear insight into what's really happening, right? Clear insight into their partner's insecurities, that inner child of their partner who needs to break free from their shackles of past pains that's now creating these future fears that's clouding their ability to be present, right? I create true connection with themselves, right? And get people to start to be vulnerable with themselves and eventually with each other, right? And that is true connection, and that is true acceptance. Again, acceptance, especially self-acceptance and self-appreciation, is the currency that we're really looking for. That's what our soul is yearning for, right? And when we don't have it, we go out looking in the outer material world for it in the form of validation. So in many cases, we're unconsciously seeking validation, not love, right? Which is why we immediately settle for companions that ultimately we're not compatible with, right? Simply because we haven't taken the time to really get to know who we are. So if we don't know who we really are, it's hard for us to get to know a stranger, especially if that stranger is not in touch with their true authentic self, right? So people end up dating each other's representatives, right? You end up falling in love with a false persona, and they end up being attracted to a false version of who you are, right? And no one can sustain this illusion for long periods of time. So the bond, right, which is usually a trauma bond, tends to eventually unravel over time. So you have to be real. And you need to know that you don't know what you don't know, right? And in my opinion, in order to thrive, you have to understand and learn the difference between rejection and alignment. So Sebastian Inge says, and I agree, that real love isn't about you. That's kind of how we got the title, just FYI, right? And so when I'm talking to somebody, I know right away where they are in their love journey, right? By asking a simple question, right? I ask, how's it going with so-and-so, whoever they're currently dating, right? And if they're over the top, I'm like, that's not real love, right? They'll say, I just love the way that they make me feel. I love the things that they do for me. I love the way that they talk to me. I love what they say to me, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with these things, right? None of those things are bad, but that isn't really love. That's validation. You're unknowingly getting a need met that is filling a void or deficit of unmet childhood needs from your past. It's a biochemical reaction that feels good, right? But as soon as that biochemical reaction wears off, you're probably blaming that person for a lot of different things, right? And then you're on to the next because you unknowingly need to feel that biochemical reaction of being validated, right? It's an emotional cycle that you're looking for because of a narrative that you're still telling yourself. And more importantly, because of unprocessed pain that you've learned to suppress, right? So the excitement that you need to feel is because of the pain that you're still holding on to, right? So love for a lot of people is very mysterious. It's hard to understand what it is, right? And for most of our human orientation to things is through the lens of self, without even having the awareness to realize this, right? And so it would be quite natural for an egoic human to show up and to look at love as something to gain, something to acquire, and something to control, because the orientation is to self. Again, it's the reason why I say that the reason that most relationships fail is because of selfishness. So Sebastian believes, and I agree again, that true love in its purest expression shows up in truth and freedom, right? Meaning that we remove ourselves from the equation, right? What most people are experiencing, however, is human love, which varies and changes, right? Which is why we can love someone so hard, call them our soulmate, our person, and then hate them and completely cut ties a year later, right? Ghost, right? And I've experienced that, right? That person was not really in love with me when I look back. They were more in love with the idea of being in love with me, right? And since then, even though we don't speak, we have mutual friends. I've seen that person call the two men that have succeeded me, call them their person, their soulmates, right? And I do believe that it's all an image. It's all perception. It's all this kind of imagination for her because she has the inability to really be present because she is unable to really look within. So Kathy, checking in with you, right? Hopefully this is making some sense to you and hopefully it's breaking down a few walls, right? And so I want to talk about the Buddha, right? So the Buddha said, when you like a flower, you just pluck it. But when you love a flower, you water it daily, right? And what I would like to add to that, which may seem contradicting because in one hand, I'm telling you to remove yourself from your egoic mind, right? And if you really don't understand that concept, then what I'm going to say next may sound confusing. The flower that we all need to water, the flower that you need to water is your connection to self, right? Your connection to the universe. That's how you and I return back to love, right? Which I believe is our default setting before we were messed up by our parents in this whole parenting environment, right? All you have to do is just look into the eyes of any infant and you'll experience pure love again, right? I believe that that is spiritual love. Through my spiritual encounter, that's what I was taught, that was downloaded to me, that this is spiritual love, right? And that is the next level above human love that only a few of us get to experience again. We're all spiritual beings having a human experience, right? There's no judgment in pure love. There's just compassion and understanding. Spiritual love varies, but never changes, right? We all have the ability to get there when we suspend and bypass our egoic mind, right? And when we're in spiritual love, I can love you, but not love your behavior. I can love you and realize later that we're not exactly compatible, right? But my love for you never changes. In the egoic mind, we would look at this as rejection, but in the spiritual realm, we look at this as alignment, right? There's vulnerability, there's truth, there's freedom. There's no need to ever control. And if I'm already loved, how can I be rejected, right? My only goal now is to align with who I am currently vibrationally matched with. So in the business world, when I'm coaching my team or doing corporate strategies and coaching around confidence and sales, I tell my people that they have the wrong relationship with the word no, right? No to me is the second best answer you can give me, right? It lets me know exactly where I stand, right? So I don't waste any more time. But in my many decades, I also know that no can often mean not right now, which also tells me that I need to be more clearer in my delivery and communication, right? The receiver on the other end may need more information to make a more and better informed decision, right? So we need to shift our minds around the energy of no. And one of the things that I love is David Meltzer's use of this excellent concept by challenging people to think, what if they were 24 no's away from having a billion-dollar company, right? How excited would you be to get your first no, right? And how quickly would you be motivated to get no's 2, 3, 4, and so on, right? So think about that. Shifting your mindset, really shifting your perspective is the key to life, right? The same in relationships. So what if I told you that you were 15 relationships from meeting your true love and your soulmate, right? But you will need to learn the takeaways from each of those 15 relationships in order to meet that soulmate, right? Meaning that each relationship would be meaningful and purpose-filled in preparing you to meet your soulmate. How would you then approach dating, right? Now, here's a cheat code. So you don't have to do 15 relationships, right? So it doesn't take you 15 relationships, right? Really, this is what you really need to know. Every bad relationship is meant to move you back into love, right? Again, first you loving yourself and honoring yourself. And once you have that, then you're able to give that. That's the perspective that you need to have, right? You need to understand your attachment styles. You need to understand your patterns. And when I look back, for me personally, at the majority of my relationships, they were all avoidant behavior attachment styles, right? And for an anxious attachment styles, which I am, right, an anxious attachment person, this is not a good mix and is not a good fit, right? So when I reflect even further, those that were anxious as well and really wanted to be with me, I put them in this category that may sound familiar to you, right? I put them in the category where I labeled them too clingy, right? I wanted a challenge. And now I didn't know, obviously back then, that I had trauma and that was continuing to play out, right? So a healthy and loving woman was unfamiliar to me, right? And so I continued to mislabel them as clingy, right? Simply because they were available to me, right? That wasn't familiar. So my lens could not see it for what it was, right? And so now I'm happy to say that I have a very secure attachment style with anxious tendencies, which allows me to align with the right woman. And it also allows me to never live in the world of rejection because I will never reject myself again, right? So we need to change our relationship with rejection or our perception of what rejection is. We're unknowingly being rejected a lot, right? And I always tell my team and my clients, if people treat you like an option, leave them like a choice, right? If someone ghosts you, respect the did. Never wait to did. It's disrespectful. And I always say that with a laugh, right? The only thing you have to realize that is hurting is your pride and your ego, and you must learn to move past the egoic mind, right? That's where you'll find your true self. And once you connect to your true authentic self and close that gap, right? Your shadows and your egos will further integrate, and you'll learn that you're already enough, that you're already worthy, and that you're already loved. So the takeaway is going to be in two parts. First, I'm going to give you, Kathy, some insight about men in your quest for love, right? And then I'm going to go and address the whole community, right? So first, I'm going to tell you this. Make sure that you know how a man feels about his mother, Kathy, right? That will give you clear insight to the level of respect that he has for women. Second, forget about your superficial list, right? Don't get caught up in the things that you have in common. Learn your values and study his values, right? So in the letter, which I didn't read online, you mentioned that you're religious, right? So you want to find someone else who is religious, right? You don't want to find a person who does not believe in religion, right? You talked about saving money. You don't want to find someone who likes to spend money, right? When you're into saving money, right? You want to find someone who is a saver as well. And the big one, you mentioned that you want to have 3 kids. So you definitely don't want to find someone who is on the fence about having kids in general, right? So move away from the superficial list. And I also say be open to your list, right? Because you can find that person who is the right person for you, but you also have to question your list and see is that really, really important, or is this really, really superficial? Which is the reason why I call it a superficial list, right? And you want to get more down to the brass tacks of all relationships, which is shared values. You want to see where you align in your values, and you also want to be open-minded in your values, which ones are planted where you put a stake in the ground and which ones are kind of flexible, right? So that you don't lose an important person, right? So the last thing I would say is you can never change a person. People have to realize this. Everyone says, I'm going to get married and they're going to change because it's going to be, no, that doesn't happen, right? Or we're going to move in together and things are going to change. No, doesn't happen. You can never change a person. So you have to ask yourself this question. Can I live with this person? And you, Kathy, specifically talking to you, can you live with this man as he is today, knowing that there's a possibility that he will never change? Can I live with him as he is right now, knowing that he may not ever change? So Kathy, hopefully, right, that insight will help you out, right? And thank you for calling me out. I'm just having fun with you when I'm actually calling your name. I'm just really having some fun. I really do thank you for sending that letter and calling me out. And this was a much needed conversation, I would say, even though I was reluctant to have it, right? So next, for everybody else, I'm simply going to give 3 concepts, right? And the first one is called the photographer, right? So when a photographer can't change a scene, he changes his angle. He or her changes the angle and changes the lens to capture the best of that scene, right? Simply when you can't change your situation and your circumstances in life, you just need to change your perspective and your mindset to get the best out of the circumstances, right? So that you can learn from it. So that was concept number one. Concept number two is the 4 concepts of rejection, right? So the first concept of rejection is rejection doesn't equal worthiness, right? What one person can't stand about you, another person will love, right? Concept rejection number 2 is rejection frees us, right? So imagine and think about going to your first job, right? If you were stuck in that first job, right? Or stuck in your first relationship, right? Rejection frees us from the bad, right? So that we can move on, we can move forward, and we can grow. Rejection concept number 3 is the rejection analogy, right? So much like in life, when things don't fit, like a new pair of shoes or a new pair of jeans, we need to exchange them for ones that do, right? So rejection is very similar, right? Nothing is wrong with you. You just need a better fit, or like I mentioned earlier, better alignment, right? And rejection concept number 4 is rejection is normal and necessary, right? Most of the times when things are involuntarily rejecting, right, us, like in the universe, is the universe's way of correcting or course correcting is what I like to say, right? Sometimes we need a new environment to grow and actualize to realize our truth. The last thing I'd like to mention about rejection, right, get you to really, really think about is rejection is either falls in 2 categories. It's either voluntary or involuntary, right? It's the voluntary one we don't have a problem with, right? We don't have a problem with telling people no, thank you. No, you know what? I'm done with this relationship. That's not a problem. The problem that we have is the involuntary rejection, right? That's the problem, right? And again, it's around the perception of what we're no longer getting, right? Again, it's the selfishness. We're being selfish. It's in our egoic mind. You don't tell me no, I tell you no. The last concept is one of my favorites, right? It's called the pencil analogy. And I think it really, really resonates with relationships, right? So there's 4 lessons in the pencil analogy. Number 1, life is like a pencil. In order for a pencil to be useful at all times, it has to go through a series of resharpening, right? And if a pencil could actually feel, that resharpening process would be painful, but necessary to continue to be useful, right? Life is the same. Our painful experiences sharpen us and allow us to grow when we face them and address them. Number 2, like an eraser on a pencil, we're given the opportunity to correct many of the mistakes that we make in life, right? They're not really mistakes, though. They're lessons we can use to be better the next time through our feedback. Number 3, every time that you feel used or taken advantage of, right, like in relationships, remember, you always leave your mark. You're writing your own personal story. So through these stumbling blocks and stepping stones, remember to never stop writing, right? And number 4, which is my favorite, always remember the most important part of you, like a pencil, is what's inside, right? So learn to tap into that magic to connect back to love, back to your default setting. Now you know. One love. Today's episode was sponsored by Help to Love, a platform to open your mind, achieve mental agility, and integrate into the person that you're meant to be. With a wealth of resources and expert advice at your fingertips, Help to Love makes prioritizing your mental well-being easier than ever. It's a non-judgmental approach to mental wellness to help you design that 10x life you deserve. Sign up today at www.helptolove.com. Join the thousands of users who have already discovered the transformative power. Register for the free webinar that will open your mind and plant seeds for your ultimate breakthrough. If you felt this episode was helpful and insightful, please like, share, and subscribe so that you'll be notified of all of our upcoming content and special announcements. I'm E.L. Brooks, your host. As always, I thank you for your support and especially your time. One love.